What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about another advanced sound design patch, if you will, in Phaseplant. Phaseplant's freaking awesome. There are so many different things that you can do that are relatively unique to the synth that you can recreate in other DAWs/synthesizers or pieces of software, but the streamlining process with this just makes it a lot easier. So as a disclaimer from before, I advise you not to try to copy this patch. It's not available yet. I will be submitting it to something that should be free if it passes, but this is more so going to be catered towards showing you guys some of these cool processing things that you can use in order to get movement like this, as opposed to trying to just, get the exact same thing. I am going to go through the entire patch, but I want to talk more so about other specific things. So before we get started, thank you guys so much. I'm getting close to 5K subscribers and I can't do it without you. And thank you so much for helping me stay motivated with the channel and for, pushing me to explore new ideas. And if this is the first time coming here, then please consider dropping a like and follow and comment. I love questions and all that stuff. And then you guys can check out all my other generator patches on my website and stuff that I have a little advertisement at the beginning of the video. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about how this stuff works. So the first thing is actually not that important. If we go into the oscillator sections or whatever, I have a couple different groups that, for one, is just a square mixed with a sine wave and some noise, and then that's being pushed out through a notch and distortion. And then a lot of this stuff is just being randomized as usual, but I went for a curved randomization type feel thing on this as opposed to the kind of the choppy one, because I'm not really trying to generate like unpredictable sounds. I'm more so trying to get specific movement. That's pretty much this. You can take a look. There's some distortion that's being automated as well. And then on the second group over here, we have two squares. This one has some detuning unison on a hard with some of this stuff, and then instead of doing just a notch, I've got both that and a bandpass. So the idea behind this is that this is supposed to serve as the good fundamental that's nice and strong, and then this is supposed to have some more vocal characteristics to it that's going to help bring that sound out. Now when you mix them together, of course, like, you're going to be worried about phase cancellation and stuff, but we'll be talking about how to fix that later down the line. So let's go ahead and go into lane one. First thing that I did was I added a stereo, which kind of summed everything to mono, and the reason why is because if you look at phase oscillation, if there's stereo information happening, then it can kind of drown out or kind of like lead us away from being able to detect phase oscillation. So a cool trick is if you have two detuned, I guess, oscillators or sounds or whatever, if you sum them to mono, then the phase is going to be a little bit more audible and it will sound more so kind of like that tearing slash flanging sound. The next thing that I did was I just boosted the low end a little bit. This is kind of like a bass patch, so I wanted to make sure that the fundamental kind of stays pretty prominent. And then we've got our first filter section, which is one of the coolest things about Phaseplant, that you can make custom filters via the slice and curve EQ. It's a little bit easier to do in the slice EQ. So this is kind of just a band boost and then a notch, and then I'm automating the frequencies of both and really pulling down the resonance of the notch filter, so that way it's cutting a pretty deep motion of the sound. Right now it's moving pretty quickly. We'll talk about that when I get to the randomization section, but don't worry about that for now. So the next thing that I did was I added an instance of multipass, and again we're doing that kind of like low end correction thing. And then over here we've got some automations on randomizations from LFO 1 and 2 for the chorus, the phaser on the cutoff and the mix. The pitch shifter is not really even, it's not like changing the pitch of it, but because it's pushing it into kind of like a granular field, it will kind of change the sound in such a way that will make it sound pretty interesting. So the next thing that I have is a comb filter, and that is kind of just sweeping around some of these like mid-range areas. And then finally I've got a low pass filter. So with this, whenever you have like some crazy filtering stuff, it's really easy to start losing a lot of the sound. And so one thing that I want to bring up right now is the fact that because we have this like semi-modular environment, we're allowed to automate a lot of the mixes on these. And while you can't automate a mix on the filter itself, the lane that you put it in, whether it be through multipass or Phaseplant, is something that you can automate in order to close the sound and open it up in a very creative way. So I encourage you guys to do that. The mix is being automated both on here and on the overall thing, so that way we still get some dry signal, and that's just going to enhance the complex movement that you're able to get out of a sound such as this. So for this particular thing, this is one cool thing that I'm going to start experimenting with more. But if you look down here, I have a note, and what this is going to do is as the pitch goes up on this, the notch filter is going to sweep downwards. So if we play this, and you get a cool sweep whenever you're messing with the pitch wheel over here. And if you're doing like multiple kind of sweeps here, then you're actually getting notching that is going to react to the actual pitch itself. So it's kind of a cool way to kind of stay on top of like just being a little bit more precise with the movement with intent as opposed to just random stuff, if that makes sense, sort of. So the next thing that I've done is we've got like some stereo information that we're introducing even though we've summed it to mono. So I've done that again, and that's just going to help bring out some artifacts. You can, like, these are optional in the first place, but this is just kind of what I chose as a creative decision. So whenever you're doing stuff like that, try to like add a bunch of stereo effects and then pull it back and see what happens. The next thing that I've done is just boosted the mid band and the high band. I think that I might actually see what happens whenever I bring this back, because initially these were in parallel, but because I ended up throwing this in serial, I don't think that I need to take off that low end as much. So the next thing that we have is the same thing as the first multipass instance, but instead of using a low pass filter, we're using a notch that is kind of opening and closing with the resonance again. It's a pretty common trick that I use to kind of just further add movement to the thing. This slice EQ is pretty much the exact same thing as this one. Actually, they are, except the only difference is I'm automating the mix on this. So again, some stuff, even though it's randomized, is still moving together in such a way. The last thing on this is some more kind of like mix involved notching and filtering and stuff, and really just like complex filtering is what's going to give you this stuff. And you don't have to have as many as I do. By all means, you know, you can just use a couple. Like you could definitely go super far with maybe just a bandpass and a notch that are being mixed between each other. But I mean, why not experiment and why not have fun? And this is kind of what I just did on that. Regarding snap heap and multipass, on the LFOs, you have some randomization options, but unfortunately you only have the ability to kind of like match between two. One thing that you can do, however, that might be kind of cool is mess with the pitch right here. And it's kind of hit or miss with how well it works. Maybe I need to spend more time with it, but you can set these parameters to kind of change within, you know, anything that you can automate whenever the kind of pitch changes. And so in theory, what I would like to do, and I don't know if this works as well as I think it does or not, but what I would like to do is while I change the pitch wheel, the other stuff is going to be affected as well. It might not work, I'm not too sure, but that's what the intention was whenever I was doing this. So next up, we've got our lane 3, and then we've pretty much got, oh, I didn't mean to do that, just an instance of stereo on the low end. And so what this is going to do is kind of just serve as a solid foundation for making sure that no matter what, the low end is going to stay consistent as far as being mono. And then what I've went and done is added another stereo on here that's going to introduce some kind of, and I think that this should actually be on top, that way the low end stays consistent, and whenever we come in here, we can kind of change this here to kind of spread the sound out if we want to or not. Finally, we've got some dynamics that's doing both upwards and downwards compression. On the left side, that's kind of like your upwards compression / expansion. And then on the right side, this is your downwards compression. So you kind of just find something that makes it sound good. And then finally, we have our limiter, which is just making sure that we're protecting our ears, even though I'm pushing the gain up just a little bit. So in theory, once you kind of have all that stuff, like you'll notice that if it's too consistent or you're doing too much filtering, you still have some play over here. So one randomizer that I've introduced is over here on the mix, and that's going to allow us to kind of reintroduce and take away some of the sound. There's a little bit more to this though. If you notice over here on not all of the randomizers, but most of them, these 3, then you'll notice that these are actually being automated by another note parameter. And so what's going to happen is whenever the pitch goes up, the note is going to push the speed of this to react faster. So watch this thing as I play a note and go up. It might be a little bit difficult to tell right here, but you can see as the note goes up, the pitch goes up, the speed of this goes up. And that's just ideally trying to tackle the idea of not necessarily like trying to recreate a sampler type function, but more so of just trying to manipulate like the speed characteristic of it, if that makes sense. I mean, honestly, you can just bounce this out and then throw it into a sampler and get that speed feel that you're looking for a lot quicker, but it's kind of cool just to experiment and see what kind of results we can get through this. So the reason why this is called a Neuro generator in the first place, as opposed to being different from all the other Neuro bases that I've made, is because we have another option of using the randomization here in order to kind of play between both this and the pitch wheel in order to get some cool tonalities. So There's some cool stuff in there. And if you wanted to, you can kind of pull all of these, except for maybe these two, into a single lane and then start to process this as a generator, as you've seen in my other videos. But really, that's kind of like one big topic that I wanted to bring in as well, is for the most part, all the generators that I've made, like if you've bought the Ascension pack or you've gotten the free thing from a Boring Mech, is most of the time I make a Neuro bass first, or I make some kind of like heavy bass tonality with a lot of movement in it, and then I start to break it with different pitch effects to try to make it do different cool things. And so if you tackle it in that way, then to me, in my own humble opinion, I see these generator things that I've been making as an evolution of just doing the Neuro bass in itself. The thing with it is that because there's so much movement and you're kind of interpolating between different frequencies, a lot of times these uses of these sounds are just for fills or for effects anyways. So it doesn't really matter whether or not I'm quote unquote trying to replicate a Neuro bass or use some other kind of like generative sound to fill in those same elements of my main sections or whatever. So really it's just opening the doors for adding options and allowing you to kind of expand your mind with taking one quote unquote complex concept and then making that simple, so that way you can use all the things that you've learned to start making new sounds. And when you start to see things that way, I feel like you really open up your mind with doing all different kinds of sounds, whether it be from bass or whatever. And and likewise you can reverse engineer it as well. Like you can just start from doing randomization and generative things that have no context of pitch, and then use something like a frequency shifter or a pitch shifter and transition that into lower frequencies to start making it into a bass. So yeah, I hope that all made sense to you. Like really the possibilities are limitless once you kind of know what you're doing with your tools, as I always say. But hopefully this was kind of like informative in the means of not necessarily like trying to show off this sound in itself, but just understanding how you can really abuse filters and random modulators to create some really interesting things that is a lot easier to do in Phaseplant. That's pretty much it for you guys. I am working on some stuff that I don't want to talk about quite yet, but it's going to be free if it gets approved again, like I said. Yeah, hopefully that stuff is informative to you guys. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video.